If it's Tuesday, a hostage deal and a short-term ceasefire could be imminent as Israeli government leaders weigh an agreement that could free roughly 50 women and children from Hamas custody. Plus, NBC polling reveals new political divisions inside both parties as the president tries to steer a massive bill through Congress to help fund two hot wars and as a crisis rages along our southern border. And new signs that the former president's brand of populist, strongman, autocratic politics has taken root deeper than you might think, both at home and abroad. Hello and welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Ryan Nobles reporting in Washington, tracking a major development in the Israel-Hamas war as the Israeli government weighs whether or not to approve a tentative agreement to free dozens of hostages being held in Gaza by Hamas. Following a cabinet meeting earlier this afternoon, the Israeli government sharing new details of this tentative deal. It would include a 4-day pause in fighting to allow the release of around 50 women and children hostages inside Gaza. Now, in exchange, Israel would release 150 Palestinian prisoners, allow additional humanitarian aid into Gaza, and temporarily suspend some drone flights over Gaza to allow Hamas to essentially round up hostages being held by other militant groups. Now, Israeli officials say the ceasefire could also extend in exchange for the release of 10 more hostages each day. Now, news of the tentative deal comes after weeks of negotiations between the U.S., Israel, and Qatar, who's mediated the discussions with Hamas. But officials have also urged caution, with President Biden telling reporters earlier today that nothing is done until it's done.
We've been working on this intensively for weeks, as you all know. I've spoken recently about it with both the Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Emir of Qatar. My team has been in the region shuttling between capitals. We're now very close. We could bring some of these hostages home very soon. But I don't want to get into the details of things because nothing is done until it's done. And when we have more to say, we will. But things are looking good at the moment.
And even with a tentative deal on the table, the details of exactly how and when hostages will be released remains uncertain. Israeli officials say at this stage they're only negotiating for Israeli hostages, but that does include dual citizens. And amid talks of a deal to release hostages, many families still don't know if their loved ones are even alive. Last night, frustrated families pressed members of the Israeli parliament on the plight of the hostages, urging them not to take any action to jeopardize their safety. And news of the tentative deal and the temporary pause in fighting that could accompany it comes amid the raging humanitarian crisis, with civilians caught in the crossfire and thousands fleeing further south. Sources familiar with the talks telling NBC News the tentative deal would allow for 300 to 400 trucks of aid to enter each day. So far, 50 aid trucks have crossed into Gaza in the last 24 hours. Now, according to the White House, along with nearly 20,000 gallons of fuel for non-governmental organizations. Joining me now is Erin McLaughlin. She is in Tel Aviv, and our Gabe Gutierrez is at the White House. Erin, let's start with you. And as we wait for the cabinet approval of this tentative agreement, tell us more about what Israeli officials are sharing about it and what the prime minister is saying.
Well, we just heard from the Israeli prime minister a short while ago address the government forum, essentially saying that he backs this deal, acknowledging that it's a difficult decision in his words, but the right decision, pointing to the fact that he says it has the backing of Israeli security services and that it would not jeopardize the safety of Israeli forces on the ground in Gaza, which is a key concern of the Israeli public. And he said that far from that, it would actually help the war effort in that it would allow the Israeli military to sort of regroup, and also vowing that this in no way means the war against Hamas is over, that once this deal is done and the prisoners and hostages exchanged, that this war effort will continue. Ryan.
Now, the government's also been facing pressure by people inside of Israel to do more to release these hostages. We saw some of that play out last night. How much does that factor into the government's decision? And have you heard from family members of the hostages about this tentative agreement?
Well, Ryan, it's a huge factor. Pressure on the government for a hostage deal only grows with each passing hour and each passing day. It is hard to overstate the agony, the anguish, the pain that the families of these hostages are going through. Just over the weekend, we saw thousands marching from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, part of a 5-day march calling for the release of their loved ones. And this is weighing on government officials as well. Benny Gantz, a key opposition leader, saying that they have decades to fight Hamas, but these hostages do not have decades to live. And that is a fact that sits with Thomas Hand. He is a single father. His 9-year-old little girl, Emily, was kidnapped on October 7th, taken into Gaza. Initially, she was reported as dead. She was on a sleepover that night. They were separated days after the attack. He was told she was dead. Then weeks later, the Israeli officials told him that they had reason to believe that she was, in fact, alive and in Gaza. And yet still, 46 days into this war, he does not have a proof of life, but he does have tonight renewed hope that his little Emily could come home. It's unclear if this deal goes through when the families will be notified of a potential release.
And of course, Aaron, we're talking about the possibility of a ceasefire. We are not there yet. The fighting is still continuing. It is intense at times, particularly around hospitals in Gaza. Both the World Health Organization and Doctors Without Borders say that doctors were killed today. What more do we know about that?
Yeah, that's right, Ryan. Earlier today, fighting engulfed a hospital in the Jabalia refugee camp and Doctors Without Borders hospital. 2 doctors were killed in the fighting. I have a statement here, actually, that released by Doctors Without Borders, also known as MSF, saying MSF has regularly shared information about Al-Auda, the hospital in question, as a functioning hospital. In the presence of our staff there to the warring parties, we condemn this strike in the strongest terms and call yet again for the respect and protection of medical facilities, staff, and patients. You know, I was just talking with a WHO official about this hospital and another NGO hospital just yesterday, the 2 remaining hospitals out of 24 hospitals in northern Gaza, and now this one engulfed in fighting, which means just 1 hospital remains in northern Gaza. WHO is calling for an immediate ceasefire. The Israeli military contends that these hospitals are being exploited by Hamas for cover. Ryan.
Okay. Aaron McLaughlin, live for us in Israel. Thank you for that. Aaron, let's turn to you now, Gabe, on the North Lawn of the White House. How important is it for President Biden to get this hostage deal done, especially when we've seen polling that shows that voters here in the United States disapprove of his handling of the war?
Well, Ryan, there have been extensive round-the-clock negotiations for weeks now. You heard it from the president and his administration speaking about how his national security team has been shuttling back and forth between Middle Eastern capitals. And, of course, Secretary of State Antony Blinken also over the last several weeks engaged in round-the-clock diplomacy. Well, the Biden administration has been very careful, though, Ryan, to really tamp down expectations for this. You just heard the president earlier today saying a deal was close and that things look good at the moment, but very careful not to get ahead of the Israelis here. But as you know, Ryan, progressives in the Democratic Party have been applying a lot of pressure on the president. And this, in some sense, could be something that the administration might have to show for this. Despite the ongoing and the increasing civilian casualties in Gaza, this could be something that the administration could point to, as this has been a priority all along. The release of these hostages, certainly a very high priority for the White House right now, Ryan.
And what could happen next, Gabe? Because, of course, we're only talking about a certain number of hostages that could be a part of this potential deal. Will the talks continue to try and release the rest of the hostages as well?
Well, certainly. And look, earlier, just a few hours ago, we heard from an Israeli spokesperson that says that it's possible that there could be extra days of a ceasefire added to this if Hamas decides to release extra hostages. For example, an extra 10 hostages could lead to an extra day in the pause in the fighting. Still a lot of unanswered questions here. And I think the expectation is, or it seems to be, that perhaps see how this first wave of hostages release, how that goes if Hamas holds up its end of the bargain, and they'll talk from there. But again, a lot of questions still remain, and especially as we wait for the approval of this tentative deal from the Israeli government, Ryan.
And one other issue happening in the Middle East, the administration also conducted another round of retaliatory strikes against militants that are targeting U.S. troops in the region. What more do we know about that?
Yeah, certainly. A lot of movement on that today, Ryan. The administration for weeks now has been saying how concerned it is about Iran and trying to prevent this Israel-Hamas war from growing into a wider war across the region. Well, today we learned that U.S. forces just west of Baghdad at an air base there were attacked, according to the Pentagon, and that the U.S. conducted a retaliatory airstrike in Iraq, the first time it's done so in Iraq recently. You'll recall there have been dozens of attacks against U.S. forces in the region over the last several weeks, but the retaliatory strikes previously have been done in Syria. Again, the Pentagon confirming a retaliatory airstrike in Iraq today. All this as the U.S. tries to tell Iran to back off. Ryan?
All right, Gabe, thank you for that update from the White House. It's time now to bring in an IDF spokesperson, Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, to talk more about the situation there. Jonathan, I appreciate you being here. It does seem as though there's optimism that we're close to a deal here. If that deal does happen, if the War Cabinet approves it, what does that mean for the IDF? Will Israeli troops remain inside Gaza even during this ceasefire? And what is the military's biggest concern about how this ceasefire will be implemented?
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you for having me. There are many moving parts, and we have to be very, very careful when we assess any deal made with Hamas. Hamas has a proven record of not honoring commitments and firing after a ceasefire comes into effect. The last time they did so was in 2014, and they abducted an Israeli officer at the time. So we keep that fresh in mind. We will implement whatever the Israeli government cabinet votes on, and whatever decision is made, the IDF will implement it on the best possible way. Of course, our troops will continue to be present in Gaza. We will continue to be focused and deployed in the area, and to conduct whatever operations necessary to defend ourselves in accordance with the terms of the agreement. And we must be, of course, very vigilant and careful. We know that the enemy will most likely try to take advantage of this ceasefire in order to improve its tactical positions, and we have to be prepared for that scenario.
And you mentioned that you don't trust Hamas in situations like these. How does that affect the effort to bring these hostages home safely? How do you balance those two things?
You know, we'll have to see what happens, right? Because it's a deal that is, according to the reports, and I think that your reporting is correct, it's also what I am aware of, but according to the reports, then it'll be on a day-by-day basis. We'll see how Hamas delivers on the agreement the first day, and then we will carry that on to the next day. But there will be room for a lot of vigilance and skepticism, and to be ready for any eventualities. We know that Hamas has complete disregard for human life, whether it is Israeli or Palestinian. They couldn't care less about the well-being of their own people. And of course, they're only using our hostages for political leverage. We keep that in mind. What they care about, Hamas, since they are a corrupt and hate-filled organization, is to kill Jews and kill Israelis. And that is how we look at everything they do and say.
Now, the IDF has already secured the release of 5 people that were being held hostage by Hamas. Have you been able to glean any information from them about the operation in Gaza?
Yes, from them and also from Hamas combatants that we have taken captive on the battlefield and interrogated quite thoroughly. They have revealed additional information which is valuable, and that adds up and is compiled by Israeli military intelligence to improve our situational awareness and, most importantly, to improve the ability to get our hostages back. Just for those who may have missed it, we are talking about 46 days. Israeli women, children, babies, infants, and elderly people, and men and women as well, are being held by Hamas for 46 days in inhumane conditions, in direct violation of everything that is right and human. And hopefully we will start seeing some of them back. But I can assure you that the aim of our war against Hamas is to dismantle Hamas, and that what we're seeing now is just one milestone in the bigger scheme of things, to get an opportunity to get hostages back, and then we will continue fighting Hamas until we eradicate them.
And there's obviously still a great concern about the Palestinians that are living in Gaza. Many of them have been displaced. If there is any sort of a ceasefire, would any of them be able to return to their homes, especially in northern Gaza, or is it still in your belief that they need to evacuate that area, get to the southern part of that region?
Yeah, the humanitarian concerns are very important. We want to make sure that the Palestinian civilians, the non-combatants, are safe, and they need to remain in southern Gaza where they are, and those that are in the north, still, we call on them to evacuate, because fighting is not done in northern Gaza. As your reporter correctly reported, there is fighting in Jabalia and Zaytun, in other areas, other Hamas strongholds in Gaza as we speak. And that continues until anything changes, until there is any type of agreement. We continue to fight and to attack the enemy. And we want to safeguard civilians. We still call on them to move towards the south. And once the fighting is done in the north, then I'm sure that we will issue guidance accordingly to the Palestinians. I hope that any ceasefire will be used by Hamas, first and foremost, to take care of the civilians in Gaza, the Palestinians who really need humanitarian aid. But something tells me, based on their behavior so far, that they won't be using it in order to make sure that Palestinian civilians are safe. They will be using the time and energy and resources made available for their military purposes and not to care for civilians.
I want to talk to you now about the fighting that's happened in and around these hospitals in Gaza. The Indonesian hospital, of course, is one of the hotspots right now. Your government's denied shelling the hospital, but said instead that it was targeting enemy fire from within the hospital. Do you believe that Hamas is also operating at this hospital, as you've said that they are operating at other hospitals? And do you have specific intelligence that would lead you to that conclusion?
Well, not only intelligence, proof on the ground. You know, a few weeks back from the Qatari hospital, which was a very nice and well-established and modern facility, Hamas operatives, combatants, fired at Israeli troops from within that hospital. And we have experienced the same thing with the Indonesian hospital, and of course, in and around Shifa. By the way, when we took the Shifa compound, not a single Palestinian civilian was wounded or killed. And that is not by chance. It is by design, because we fight while respecting the human dignity and the need for protection of civilians. Any loss of life of medical personnel or non-combatants is not the intended outcome, and we are working very hard in order to minimize the effect on civilians. It cannot, we cannot always guarantee it. I don't know specifically how these doctors died and what happened on the ground. I've heard the reports, we're looking into it, but I can say categorically, yes, Hamas systematically uses hospitals, and this has been proven, I think, beyond any doubt, that they use the hospitals for military purposes, or let's call them non-medical purposes, to fight against us. And this is also the case with the Indonesian hospital and all of the other facilities that are supposed to enjoy the special status of protection according to humanitarian law.
All right, Jonathan Conricus, thank you so much. We appreciate you being here. And we're now going to bring in, our NBC News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent, Andrea Mitchell. And Andrea, you, of course, have been reporting extensively on this controversy surrounding the hospitals. You saw Jonathan Conricus there. He actually posted a video where he went through the Al-Shifa hospital trying to display this evidence that they say they've collected. What's your reaction to his response to how they've handled this?
Well, the U.S. has its own intelligence, and we have not seen very much detail from the U.S. either. They were calling it nodes, not a command and control, as you would normally assume a command and control. But they have said that U.S. intelligence confirms what Israel is saying, that there have been Hamas groups or nodes under the hospital, that Hamas should not be using them as shields. But at the same time, both Matt Miller at the State Department, John Kirby at the White House today, again repeated, as Secretary Blinken has said, that does not justify airstrikes against hospitals or large ground offensive against hospitals, that the civilian deaths are entirely too many. They say they have been telling the Israelis that and wanting to see concrete steps from Israel as to how they are trying to do what they say they're doing, which is to minimize civilian casualties. Also, another hospital that was evacuated on warnings from the IDF was evacuated, I guess, about 2 weeks ago, maybe a little more than 2 weeks ago. This is the Children's Hospital, Rantisi Hospital in the north. And I know from people, doctors and medical personnel and others who've been working with a particular nurse who was inside the hospital, the last person to leave as they were finally evacuating the patients, the children, that in that basement area that they a week later showed with some weapons, that when she left, when she was going down there were at the time people being sheltered there until they were evacuated. There were displaced people, thousands of them, men, women, and children. She said when she would go down for supplies to that basement area, she couldn't walk easily because she had to step around the Palestinians who were sheltered there. It was not Hamas. It was not a military installation.
Right.
The last she saw it. But then it was empty for 4 or 5 days. And so the suggestion is that they could have entered or that they could have been placed there. So the so-called evidence could have been. So there's a lot of questions about that hospital in particular, because there are a lot of outside people in various NGOs who had been in and out of that hospital when it was built and knew more about it. Now, that's not dispositive about the proof.
Right.
So in any case, concerns today still at the State Department and the White House, even as this hostage deal is supposedly getting closer and closer, that there have been too many civilian deaths.
Right.
One other thing about the warnings, I was interviewing a spokesman for Israel, the civilian spokesman earlier, Adon Levy, and he was saying we had 30,000 warnings, cell phone warnings to people to move south, to get out of harm's way. But that was at a time when there was no cell service. Yeah. From my real-time interviews with people, with our own people and people in and out of Gaza, the fuel had run out and the telecom company had shut down cell service because they didn't have fuel for their generators.
Right. And also the idea that picking up and going hundreds of miles as if that is something that can be done easily, especially in a war zone. Obviously, the humanitarian...
I think it's less than hundreds of miles.
Right, yeah.
The length of the strip. We can check that. But it's in and out of strike zones. There have not been the safe corridors and the safe areas that has been suggested.
Right, and largely on foot, too, in the war zone.
Mostly on foot.
Yeah. So let's talk about the tentative deal. It appears by all measure that it's going to be passed by the War Cabinet, but it hasn't come through exactly. Talk us through it. What are some of the sticking points? Is there anything that could hold it up at this point?
Well, one thing is there's a 24-hour delay while victims of Palestinian terror have the right of appeal to the Israeli Supreme Court to not let a particular Palestinian prisoner be released as part of the exchange. Now, that could be eliminated or circumvented if the women and children on the list to be released are not women involved in violent crimes. So one doesn't know. But those terror victims do, under Israeli law, have the 24-hour right of appeal. So that is one issue. Israel does have the right to vet the Palestinians and have final approval over who is being returned. It's supposed to be approximately 3 for 1, so 50 hostages over time, and then 150 Palestinian prisoners, also women and children. Israel has also said, I think Netanyahu, as we know, said that they would be released in stages. So I think that may have, in fact, been something that evolved in the cabinet. It was not in the earlier explanations that we were receiving from various sources in Qatar and the U.S. So it could be that that's something that the harder line cabinet ministers were insisting on. But Netanyahu wants this deal and had the votes for it, as far as we know.
Okay, so we'll have to see how it all plays out. Of course, whether or not it's executed in a way that brings these people home safely. Andrew Mitchell, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. Still ahead, the road to the White House. Our panel weighs in on the current president's bumpy path ahead and the former president's revenge tour. Plus, American colleges in turmoil over the Israel-Hamas war. New NBC News reporting on how one Ivy League university and its students are responding to incidents of unrest and anti-Semitism. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Turning now to an intensifying battle here at home that's playing out on college campuses as war rages abroad and as the White House tries to tamp down a rise on anti-Semitism. Cornell University has in some ways been the center of this domestic turmoil. Classes there were canceled earlier this month after a student was arrested and accused of making violent anti-Semitic threats. But that incident came after more than a week of protests from both pro-Israeli and pro-Palestinian students. NBC News correspondent Antonia Hilton spoke to Cornell students from both sides of this debate, and she joins me now to talk more about this. So, Antonia, how do the students from both sides describe the mood on campus right now?
You know, Ryan, it was really heartbreaking to spend some time with them because students on every side with all kinds of connections to the region, they describe heartbreak, struggling to sleep, being fearful, walking to classrooms. For Jewish students, the arrest and charge of this classmate of theirs is, of course, heartbreaking and terrifying. That kind of rhetoric has really shaken them to their core. And then what I hear from Muslim students is that students have been videotaping them, taking photographs of students who wear hijabs, making them feel really unsafe in the aftermath, or making them to feel as though they're somehow responsible for what's happened. And so, you know, these are really young people. Some of them, you know, aren't even adults yet in some cases. And so to see kids who in some ways have something in common, you know, they feel like they're grieving, they feel that they've lost something or their loved ones are at risk, you know, have such a hard time coming together and finding a space for dialogue. It was a bit heartbreaking to see. Take a listen to part of the conversation that I had with both groups of students on campus. Some of those classmates tell me that some of the chants and phrases, like from the river to the sea, to mean the extermination of Jews. What do you have to say to them?
Okay. Everybody in this vicinity, regardless of religion, of race, of ethnicity, should live free under one state, under one secular state with equal citizenship. That's what it meant. And the question I have to ask people then, where is it from the river to the sea Palestinians shouldn't be safe?
I want peace in the Middle East too, just as much as anyone else. My problem is with that slogan in specific, not whatever message anyone thinks they're sharing with it, because Hamas has used it. It's been appropriated by a terrorist organization. So you can't say it anymore and think that it means peace.
What you find here is that simple words or phrases like from the river to the sea mean very different things to different people. The same goes for the word Zionist or Zionism. To the Jewish students who I spoke with, they said it's about their right to self-determination, to a safe homeland. But for some of the Muslim students on campus, it means the expulsion of Palestinian people and a disregard for their connection to the land and to the region. And so they hear different things when they use these terms. And so without a shared language, Ryan, it was hard. We asked them if they would get together in the same room. And right now, both sides agree that that's just not possible.
Oh, okay. Antonia, terrific reporting. Thank you so much for sharing. We appreciate it. And up next, new numbers from our NBC News poll and the message that voters are sending to Congress as it weighs more aid to Israel and Ukraine. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. This holiday season, the top item on the Senate's wish list is a supplemental aid package that funds American allies around the world and makes improvements to the U.S. immigration system. And lucky for those negotiators, all the topics being discussed in that package seem to actually be relatively popular, which isn't something we're familiar with when we're talking about Congress. Check this out. Our new NBC News poll finding that increased border security funding, humanitarian aid to Gaza, and military aid to Israel and Ukraine and Taiwan all have more than majority support among voters. Now, to be sure, Congress has plenty of hurdles in both the Senate and the House before appropriating any of these additional funds. Now, one of those hurdles is the fact that there are divisions inside both parties, with Republicans divided on aid to Ukraine and Democrats divided on how it should be spent in Israel. Joining me now on set is Susan Page, of course, the Washington bureau chief for USA Today, Republican strategist Jim Dornan, and Chuck Rocha, the co-host of the Latino Vote podcast and the founder of the Nuestro PAC. So, Susan, explain this to me. This is something that has broad support across the country, but yet it will be difficult to pass in Congress. Is that an example of why Congress is in a bit of a bizarro world right now, that they can't get something popular over the finish line?
If only this were news to us, you know, that,
I know, right?
even things that most Americans support can't get through Congress. I mean, the Senate may be enthusiastic about this, or parts of the Senate. The House is like going to be a whole nother kettle of fish, and Mike Johnson, the new speaker, is going to have a difficult time getting a unified package through the House. I think that's really unlikely. And when you break it up, you lose some of the momentum where one part keeps the other part, helps the other part get over the finish line. Yeah. I think it's going to be really tough.
Yeah, it is like a tension rod. It's got to be pulled. You pull it apart and it falls apart. And Jim, I'm really interested in the border security piece of all of this, and I think the border security piece is kind of the linchpin in terms of bringing this all together. And the reason being that it's a lot more popular across the board than it was in 2016 when Donald Trump was talking about building a wall. You see both Republicans and Democrats united in this idea that something needs to be done at the southern border. Is the electorate more Trumpier, or is it a reflection of the reality on the ground?
I think there's much more attention being paid to it, mainly because of the Republicans who are yelling and screaming about it. But, I mean, with 150 potential terrorist list suspects in the country, I mean, it's got people thinking about it. So whereas a year ago probably wouldn't have registered more than 10 or 15%, I think it's one of the main issues that's going to hurt Biden.
Yeah, well, Chuck, does it hurt President Biden if he does push through some sort of a border security package that includes policy changes, maybe changes to asylum, maybe the reinstitution of the Remain in Mexico program? Do Latino voters penalize him for that if something like that gets through?
It's different state to state. We've all talked about Latinos not being a monolith. They look very differently in Cuba than it does on the Texas border, which is much different than the voters in Arizona and Nevada. There's one thing for sure, though. The winner will go through the Latino vote because of our population in Arizona and Nevada and some key congressional races. One of the points of contention that we don't talk about is in 15 marginal congressional districts, there's more than 28% Latino population, and in 8 of those, Latinos make up over 45% of that electorate. They will determine who controls Congress because Latinos have grown out of the major urban areas where we used to always be in San Antonio and L.A. and New York. And now we're in Nebraska. Now we're in the outskirts of Tucson. So I think that going and talking to this community, all depending on where you are, could have a big issue.
And how do you talk about this issue, Chuck? I mean, is it mass deportation? Is it saying that you're going to send the military down to the border?
No matter who the immigrant is and how long they've been here, everybody's going to be for quote unquote border security. The way you talk about handling refugees, people that are seeking asylum, women and children trying to escape horrible situations is, I think, the real how you get it done.
Yeah. Okay. So, Susan, of course, Donald Trump has been leaning into this issue of border security. He's the one talking about mass deportations, talking about bringing the military down to deal with these cartels. How does that impact the 2024 race in terms of the other Republican candidates as well?
Yeah, Trump's appeal to Hispanic voters has been really remarkable, and it's kind of paralleled the inroads he's made among black voters. This is a voter group that used to be pretty safely Democratic, and I think that is no longer really the case. One of the issues is the border. There, as you say, Latinos are divided on how to handle this issue. So are Democrats. So Joe Biden has Democratic mayors in big cities like New York saying you have to do something about the influx of undocumented people. But then he's got liberals, Latinos, others in his coalition who are opposed to things that seem draconian to try to address that.
And it seems with each passing day, Jim, that Donald Trump becomes stronger within the Republican Party, that this primary that's being run seems to be a primary for second place. Now we're seeing even some kind of tried and true never-Trumpers changing their tunes yet again, the latest being Peter Meyer, a former Republican member of Congress, a moderate member of Congress who was voted out in the last election cycle. He's now running for the Senate in Michigan, could be a strong general election candidate if he can get through the primary. And he told Peter Myers told Politico that his overarching goal is to make Joe Biden a one-term president. I think that the economic damage that he has wrought and will continue to bring will have a far more wide-reaching negative consequences on the country than a second non-consecutive term for Donald Trump, which is pretty shocking given how critical he was of him before. I mean, is this
I think he called him unqualified.
Yeah, exactly.
President.
I mean, what do you make of this?
I think he must have done poll numbers and realized that he's got to have the Trump base if he's going to win that primary. Because Mike Rogers is not going to be an easy candidate to beat.
Right.
But I mean, in Michigan, Trump does have a strong base there, and I understand completely why he did it. I'm sorry that we're walking backwards on some of the stuff that Trump is doing instead of moving forward. But I think it's just the nature of the base right now.
Yeah. Well, so Chuck, if you get through a Republican primary in a state like Michigan, can you win the general election if you're running alongside Donald Trump?
Michigan's one of those last pure, true swing states. And back to what Susan just said, black voters in Detroit, if they don't show up and don't show up at the numbers that they're supposed to, it's hard for any Democrat. Then you have these emerging groups, some of which are Muslim groups, some of which are Latino groups. Like, do they stay home when you look back at what Biden and the Middle East and all the things that are going on, all of these little small margins now for political guys like me that are doing focus groups every single day, these margins matter now.
Yeah. So, Susan, President Biden's approval rating, of course, a big drag on the Democratic Party right now. It's hovering around 40%, the lowest it's been in the NBC News poll. And the voters who somewhat disapprove of him, they're going to be very pivotal in this next election cycle. They make up about 9% of the electorate. They narrowly break for Trump in this poll. He really trailed with voters like this, these swing voters in the last election cycle. How does President Biden bring those voters back onto his side of the ledger?
I think he does it by delivering as president. I think the White House would argue the economy is looking better, inflation is moderating to some degree. He needs people to feel that in their lives, so they give him higher ratings on the economy. He needs things like this hostage deal in Israel, which we're all pulling for humanitarian reasons. But if that happens, it reflects well on his leadership and diplomacy in that region. So I think there's no way to talk your way into the White House. If you're the incumbent president, you have to perform your way into the White House, deliver.
It's interesting, Chuck. Obviously, Democrats are nervous about this poll, but I was reminded this time in the last election cycle, we'd never even heard of the coronavirus. How much could things change between now and Election Day next year?
I would remind you, I've worked on a presidential primary where my candidate had a heart attack. I've seen a lot of things change overnight.
I was there, Chuck. I was there.
And that's why I bring it up, because things change every day in the work that I do. Yeah. Every day is a catastrophe. I live in chaos every single day. And with the emergence of social media and all of these cell phones, folks are getting instantaneous information and they're hungry for it all the time. So they're there, they're excited, boom, and then they move on.
Is enthusiasm the key, though, Jim? Does he have to reignite that with the Democratic base?
I think the two biggest motivators for Democrats to go to the polls are Trump and abortion. And I think on the Republican side, it's going to be Biden, and it'll be, take a pick. Economy, the border, whatever it happens to be. But, I mean, I think that eventually you'll get your voters who you want.
It's interesting. Jim said the two biggest drivers of enthusiasm for the Republicans and Democrats are the other guys running, right? Is that
absolutely?
That tells us where we are in this state of American politics right now. Thank you guys all for being here. Have a very happy Thanksgiving. If I don't see you, we appreciate you being here. Still ahead, the bombastic media personality turned far-right politician now poised to lead a country in turmoil. We're not talking about Donald Trump. We're looking at Argentina's uncertain future and what it says about the rise of far-right politics everywhere as its newly elected president promises to take a chainsaw to the system. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Less than a year before Election Day here in the United States, Argentina just held a contentious and polarizing election of its own, with Javier Milei, a right-wing economist, defeating Argentina's economy minister. Milei's victory comes as Argentina faces soaring inflation, and his populist attacks on what he calls the political caste is resonating with the far right here in the U.S. Donald Trump has already congratulated him on social media. And joining me now is Will Freeman. He's a fellow for Latin American Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. So talk to me about Javier Milei's victory. How big of a shock was it in Argentina?
This was a landslide. Javier Milei won by over 10 points. Argentina has not seen an election like this for years, if ever. Now, what made the headlines is that Milei is really an eccentric misfit. He calls himself an anarcho-capitalist. He campaigned revving a chainsaw, saying that he'd taken axe to Argentina's political caste. And he even has 4 cloned dogs that he's named after libertarian economists. So that all makes him a colorful character. But as bizarre as it might sound, this signals a really serious change for Argentina. The country's in a deep economic crisis. It has 140% inflation that's just going up. That's pushed over 40% of the population into poverty. And there are many Argentinians who looked at the situation and said neither the center left nor the center right has been able to get us out of this trap for years. So why not take a chance on someone like Javier Milei? The real question will be, is the medicine worse than the disease? Is he able to deliver any solutions, or will this preface a period of heightened instability and even more crisis?
You know, it's interesting, Will, because we've seen American politicians, particularly right-wing politicians, kind of jump on the Milei train, if you will, and many comparing him to Donald Trump. But Donald Trump is really more of a populist. Is Milei more of a libertarian? So is he more like Donald Trump? Is he more like David Koch, the big billionaire financer of campaigns here in the United States?
Well, I think he's more of a classic and even extreme libertarian, but he's also on the campaign trail expressed sympathy for social conservatism to try to widen out his coalition. So we brought on board a very far-right vice presidential candidate, now vice president-elect, who's an open apologist for Argentina's military dictatorship of the 1970s, which murdered tens of thousands of people. He also came out strongly against abortion, which Argentina legalized in 2021. And so you saw him try to sort of broaden his coalition that way. However, his speech after winning, he did seem to double down on his more traditional libertarian views, his ideas that the country needs to slash public spending, shrink the state, even dissolve the central bank. Those are among his proposals. Another key difference with Donald Trump is that while Trump was at the helm of a powerful political party, the Republican Party, when he won, Milei's party coalition, Liberty Advances, controls just a minority of seats in Congress and is very, very far from being able to pass legislation on its own. So he could see himself more limited.
Yeah, so it's going to take a little bit to pull that chainsaw out, is what you're telling me. Maybe expand a little bit on the specific conditions in Argentina that led to someone like Milei being able to win by such a wide margin. What are things like there? You
see economic dysfunction in Argentina that is almost unparalleled elsewhere in Latin America. Yeah, you have the basket cases of Venezuela, of Cuba. Argentina is increasingly looking like it belongs on that list. While most of the countries in South America have managed to get inflation back mostly under control since the pandemic, Argentina is still reeling. Poverty's vastly increased over the last few years. A lot of it has to do with the fact that there really is a bloated public sector in Argentina. There is large-scale clientelism and a public sector that is often manipulated for political reasons. So in some of his diagnosis, Milei gets things right. But I think what Argentinians are still very divided over is whether or not his prescriptions are going to make the problem better or actually worse.
And are there parallels between what we're seeing play out in Argentina and what's happening here in the United States, or are we trying to find connections that don't actually exist?
Always a good question. I do think that you're seeing some conservative social backlash to progressive changes on social issues in both countries. I mentioned the issue of abortion. In Argentina, abortion rights were ultimately expanded because of a pretty powerful bottom-up movement from civil society. But now you're seeing another part of society opposed to that, supporting a candidate like Milei. I also think you're seeing concern with rising crime in both countries. Now, both countries are far from the most dangerous or violent in the Western Hemisphere. We're not talking about a Colombia or a Mexico. But in both cases, you have a lot of people feeling increasingly unsafe, and I think they're looking for a strong figure, similar to a Milei who promises, extreme policy actions, because it looks like someone who's going to be able to take order and resolve some of the chaos.
Will Freeman, thank you for enlightening us. Excellent conversation. We appreciate you being here. Thanks.
Thanks for having me on.
And up next, Meet the Press Now meets the man making history in the Virginia State House. The former capital of the Confederacy will soon swear in its first black House Speaker in its 400-year history. The Virginia speaker-designee, Don Scott, joins me on set after this. Stay here. Welcome back. The start of the 2024 legislative session will mark a historic day in Virginia when a black lawmaker will preside as Speaker of the Virginia House of Delegates for the first time in that state's more than 400-year history. Earlier this month, Delegate Don Scott was elected by his Democratic Party colleagues to lead them in the House after Democrats flipped control of the state House and retained control of the state Senate in last month's elections. Of course, that party vote won't be official until the General Assembly is sworn in on January 10th, but my next guest feels pretty confident about it. He's the Virginia delegate and speaker-designee Don Scott. He joins me now to talk more about what's ahead. Speaker-designee, first of all, congratulations on your post and the victories that you guys had in this last election cycle. I'm, of course, a former Virginia State House reporter, so it's exciting to talk to you. What are your takeaways from this election? The current governor, Republican Glenn Youngkin, invested heavily to prevent you and your colleagues from taking control of the House. What do you think voters had to say about this election?
First of all, thank you, Ryan, and I appreciate you having covered Virginia. You understand how difficult it is in Virginia to win when the governor's in office. He has the power. He has the power of the pen and the budget and the bully pulpit. And I think what the Virginia voters told the governor was that we want you to focus on Virginia because he has some other aspirations, some other ambitions outside of the state. And he told them, hey, come back home and focus. And I think Virginia voters said, listen, we care about protecting women's reproductive health care. We care about preventing gun violence. We care about making sure that every voter has the right to exercise their sacred franchise. And we want to make sure that we do everything in our power to make sure that every hard worker in Virginia is rewarded for their hard work with the dignity of having equal pay for women and a minimum wage to be able to take care of their families.
Now, what does it mean, do you think, for other black Virginians to see someone like you in a position like this? I covered Doug Wilder, who was, of course, the first black governor in Virginia, and he often talked to me about the importance of having African Americans in positions like this. Talk to me about the weight of that responsibility for your fellow black Virginians.
Well, actually, I'm actually very, very happy to be in this role. I'm grateful. My faith has gotten me here. My family's support has gotten me here. I had the opportunity to have breakfast with Governor Wilder just last week. It was very inspiring to talk to someone who has been through so much of the history in Virginia. And I think what it says is that people are no longer looking at just race. People are looking for competence. People are looking for efficiency. People want effectiveness. And I think it says a lot that not only will I be coming in, but we'll have a record number of black legislators and the most diverse group of legislators from LGBTQ communities, Asian American, Latinos, the whole gamut of what Virginia looks like. And so it's a great opportunity, and I'm grateful. I think it tells black Virginians that you're valuable. Your voice is heard. This is the former capital of the Confederacy, and now for the first time in the 405-year history of the Commonwealth of Virginia, it will be a black man wielding the gavel in the House, in the People's House.
Right.
And I just want to say, it's great that I'm the first black speaker, but I also see myself as a speaker who happens to be black.
Right.
And one of the things that Governor Wilder has always told me is that it's important that we be good. It's important that we be excellent. And so I want to be that, and hopefully I'll live up to the goals and the ideas that the community wants from me from all over the Commonwealth.
Well, let's talk about what you hope to do as a legislative leader, because you do have a Republican in the governor's office still. What are areas where you can work with Governor Youngkin to try and get something done over the next 2 years?
Well, I think there are several issues that we can work on. And I think the governor has already signaled that he's ready to reset and ready to work with us. Mental health reform, dealing with the opioid crisis, making sure that we do things to make sure that we make our mental health care system more accessible and more robust. We've neglected invested in that system, and now we've seen that we have some issues that we need to shore up. I think we have an opioid substance abuse crisis going on in the Commonwealth of Virginia and throughout the country. I think we can address that and agree on that. I think the governor is interested. He's a businessman. He's interested in increasing economic development and economic activity in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and we want to make sure that we do do that in partnership with him. I think there are several areas that we can work together to make sure that we do that. And public education is the last one. I think the governor is interested in making sure that we make up for learning loss and invest in our children and our teachers and get our teacher pay up to the national average. And I think we can work with him.
And I do want to talk to you about another issue that you have unique insight into, and that's the restoration of rights for ex-felons. You, of course, have talked openly about your experience serving time in prison after an incident when you were younger. You obviously have gotten past that and have established yourself. This was something that Virginia lags behind in. It was something Governor McDonnell worked on, trying to get more of the restoration of voters' rights. Governor McAuliffe. It slowed down a bit under Governor Youngkin. Do you think there's an opportunity to codify this into law, that when someone has served their time, gotten back into the community, that their voting rights automatically be reestablished?
The first thing that you do, you want to heal the community, and you want to restore folks to where they were if they've done everything that they're supposed to do. And I think Governor McDonnell believed in that, Governor McAuliffe believed in that, Governor Northam believed in that, and unfortunately, Governor Youngkin has decided to slow everything down a bit and take us a little backwards. I think he has the opportunity to step up and take advantage of this historic opportunity and restore rights. And if he doesn't, we introduced a constitutional amendment to take it away from the governor. Virginia is one of the few states that permanently disenfranchise folks. It's a vestige of old Jim Crow. It's a vestige of the flash, the response to Reconstruction. And the governor has a chance to move the Commonwealth of Virginia forward, and we want to help him.
All right. Well, thank you. We appreciate you being here, Mr. Speaker. Thank you so much. And that's going to do it for us this hour. Hallie Jackson Now is up next on News Now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.